The silence in that San Diego boardroom was a weapon. It was heavier than the G-forces that pressed me into my seat during a 9G turn, and more suffocating than the dust of a Kandahar landing zone. Out the floor-to-ceiling window, the afternoon sun glinted off the Pacific, and I could just make out the shape of Coronado Island, a place where warriors are forged. Here, in this temple of glass and steel, they were trying to break one. My name is Captain Maya Singh. To the United States Air Force, I am call sign Viper, pilot of the A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog. I am a 34-year-old instrument of surgical violence, trained to deliver freedom from a 30mm cannon that spits fire at 4,000 rounds a minute. I have faced surface-to-air missiles over hostile territory, nursed a bird with one engine back to base, just before sunrise, and held the lives of soldiers in my hands, their desperate voices crackling in my headset. I am comfortable in chaos. But this sterile, air-conditioned quiet, wearing a business suit that felt more restrictive than my flight gear, this was a new kind of hell. Across the mahogany expanse sat my uncle, Robert Singh, the man who took me in when my parents' plane went down, the man who held my hand at their funeral and promised to protect their legacy, to protect me. His face, once a source of comfort, was now a mask of cold ambition. It was a look I recognized. It was the look of a predator that knows its prey is cornered. His lawyer, a man whose suit probably cost more than my first car, rose to his feet. His voice was smooth, polished, and utterly devoid of humanity. He used pieces of my military psychological evaluations, twisting them like a knife. Captain Singh's record, while superficially impressive, shows a clear pattern of recklessness, he purred, letting the word hang in the air. I clenched my fists under the table, my knuckles white. Recklessness. I thought of a night mission outside Bagram, disobeying a direct order to hold position so I could provide air cover for a pinned-down Ranger platoon. They called it reckless. The Rangers called it a miracle. He wasn't done. Her file is littered with evidence of an inability to conform, a resistance to authority. The trauma of her profession has, regrettably, rendered her psychologically unstable. The words were designed to dismantle me piece by piece, to paint me as a broken soldier, unfit to lead the aerospace company. My father built from the ground up. I could feel the board members' eyes on me, their gazes a mixture of pity and calculation. But the lawyer was just the softening up run. The main attack came from Robert. He leaned forward, not a flicker of the man who raised me left in his eyes. He smiled, a tight, merciless little smirk, and spoke not to the board, but directly to me. His voice was low, intimate. It's not just about her temperament. The truth is, she is fundamentally unworthy of her parents' legacy. Unworthy. The word wasn't loud, but it detonated in the room with the force of a 500-pound bomb. It vaporized the air in my lungs. I've had shrapnel tear through my flight suit. I've walked away from a hard landing that should have killed me. Nothing, not one single moment in combat, had ever hurt like that. It was a direct hit to my soul, a piece of ordnance designed just for me. As the ringing in my ears subsided, I saw Robert's partner, Marcus Thorne, a man who oozed cologne and condescension, lean over to a potential investor. He whispered, but he wanted me to hear it. He made sure I heard it. These combat dolls are always trouble. Too much ego, not enough sense. Combat doll. In that instant, I understood. This wasn't a business move. This was an execution. They weren't just trying to take my inheritance. They wanted to erase my identity. They wanted to strip away the uniform, the wings, the call sign, and leave nothing behind but the broken little girl my uncle could control. They saw the shock on my face and mistook it for surrender. A fatal error. Because they don't know my father. Major David Raptor Singh didn't just teach me how to fly, he taught me how to fight. He knew the kind of man his brother was. He knew that the most dangerous threats don't always announce themselves with a missile lock warning. Before he died, he foresaw this exact battle. And he left me more than a legacy. He left me a flight plan for a war he knew I'd have to fight on the home front. This is my story. The story of how they tried to ground me for good. Before I take you into the cockpit and we start this fight, I need to know my wingmen are out there. Tell me where you're listening from in the comments. And hit that subscribe button if you've ever had the very people who were supposed to be your shelter try to burn you to the ground, simply because you dared to fly. The chairman's gavel struck the polished oak, a sharp crack that echoed the breaking of my own spirit. It was as final as a firing squad's volley, executing my uncle's perfectly crafted lies and my own future along with them. The hearing was over. I remained frozen in the expensive leather chair, my body numb. Years of discipline, thousands of hours logged in a cockpit where a single twitch could mean disaster, kept my spine ramrod straight. But inside, I was in a flat spin, tumbling out of control. Across the room, Uncle Robert and my cousin Marcus were already accepting condolences from investors, performing a somber pantomime of grief as if they were at a funeral. In a way, they were. It was mine. Such a tragedy. I overheard one of my parents' old friends murmur, her voice dripping with insincere pity. "I'm so sorry you two have to deal with all this." Uncle Robert let out a theatrical sigh, loud enough for me to hear. "We just want what's best for her." I could feel dozens of pairs of eyes boring into my back, not with sympathy, but with a sick, voyeuristic curiosity. I was their afternoon entertainment, the family catastrophe laid bare for the corporate world to dissect. I didn't cry. Tears were a luxury I couldn't afford. The flight suit I wore in my mind was fire retardant, built to withstand the heat, but this was a different kind of flame, one that burned from the inside out. Finally, my limbs obeyed. I stood. The journey from my chair to the heavy mahogany doors felt longer and more perilous than any combat sortie I'd ever flown. Every head turned. They didn't see Maya Singh, the girl who grew up with blueprints and engine grease under her fingernails, the woman who served her country as a combat pilot. They saw the spectacle, the unstable, unworthy heir her uncle had painted her to be. The mid-afternoon California sun was a physical blow as I pushed the door open. And there they were, on the top step, holding court. Uncle Robert and Marcus, surrounded by a deferential circle of suits. My uncle saw me and raised his voice, a calculated act of public humiliation. "We just hope," he announced to the crowd, "that she gets the help she so desperately needs." I fixed my gaze on the horizon and walked past them, my face a mask of indifference I didn't feel. I headed for my old, beat-up pickup truck, the one Dad and I had rebuilt in the garage. My path took me past the propeller, the diner where I'd washed dishes every summer to save for flight school. Mr. Chen, the owner who always snuck me extra fries and called me Captain Maya, was suddenly engrossed in polishing a counter that was already gleaming. He wouldn't meet my eyes. A little further down, I saw Mrs. Gable, my old English teacher, quickly draw her living room curtains shut. Their silence was a verdict, harsher than any gavel. The town I called home was no longer home. It had become hostile airspace. By the time I fumbled the door to my truck open, my hands were shaking so badly I dropped the keys. They clattered on the asphalt, a small, tinny sound in the vast silence of my new isolation. As I bent to pick them up, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The caller ID flashed on the screen. Colonel Shepard Miller. I took a ragged breath and answered. Viper. His voice was a low rumble, steady and solid as a carrier deck in a calm sea. Heard there was some turbulence on the home front. Just wanted you to know the squadron's got your 6. Whenever you're ready, the cockpit is waiting. His words were a lifeline, a clean transmission cutting through the static in my head. He didn't offer pity or ask for details. He offered belonging. He reminded me of who I was. Viper, a pilot, a part of a team. I finally managed to get the key in the ignition. The old engine turned over with a familiar groan. I pulled away from the curb, leaving the shrinking silhouette of the Singh Aeronautics building in my rearview mirror. I wouldn't look back. An old piece of my father's advice surfaced from the depths of my memory, something he'd told me after a particularly bad training flight. Sometimes, Maya, to hold your position, you have to know when to execute a tactical retreat and regroup. I was retreating. But as the truck ate up the miles of asphalt leading out of town, a single question echoed in the sudden quiet of my future. Where in the hell do I go now? The endless asphalt ribbons of California blurred into a gray, hypnotic smear under the worn tires of my beat-up Tacoma. I was driving on pure instinct, my foot a dead weight on the accelerator, trying to outrun a fire that was burning inside my own skull. Every billboard, every sun-bleached exit sign felt like an accusation. The question hung in the stale, recycled air of the cab, a ghost I couldn't shake. Where the hell do I go now? My whole life had been a series of coordinates, of waypoints, of mission objectives. Now the map was blank. I needed an anchor, something solid to grasp in the wreckage. My hand left the wheel, fumbling to open the glove compartment, the plastic catch groaning in protest. My fingers brushed past brittle gas receipts that chronicled a cross-country escape, a fossilized stick of spearmint gum, and a tire pressure gauge I'd never used. Then, they closed around something cold. Heavy. Real. I pulled it out, letting it rest in my palm under the weak dome light. An old, grease-stained and 6-bolt, its cadmium plating worn away in spots, its threads still sharp despite the years. The talisman I'd carried in the thigh pocket of my flight suit through every sortie, every deployment. A small piece of home in the violent skies over God-forsaken deserts. And just like that, the endless highway vanished. The drone of the engine faded into a distant hum. I was 17 again, and the world smelled of hope and WD-40. The universe was our garage back then, a 2-car cathedral of steel and oil where my dad and I worshipped at the altar of a derelict Stearman biplane we'd christened the Spirit. For one solid year, my life revolved around its skeletal, fabric-stripped frame. My alarm screamed before the sun even thought about rising, sometime around 5 each morning, tearing me from dreams of flight. I'd be out there in the pre-dawn chill, the scent of solvent and metal a sharp, clean perfume, meticulously cleaning aileron cables with a rag soaked in mineral spirits or polishing struts until my fingers were raw and my reflection stared back at me from the gleaming aluminum. I learned the language of torque wrenches and safety wire, the distinct click of a perfectly seated bearing, the throaty smell of hot Castrol engine oil. The real test, my Mount Everest, was the landing gear. One of the original shear bolts was missing, a custom-machined piece of hardened steel with a non-standard thread pitch, impossible to source, decades out of production. "We'll make one," Dad had said, his voice calm as if it were as simple as making coffee. For me, it was like being asked to build the pyramids with a pocket knife. He led me to the ancient, colossal metal lathe that sat in the corner like a sleeping iron beast. He spent a single afternoon showing me the basics. His large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle as they guided mine, his voice a low rumble explaining the esoteric mysteries of cutting speeds and thread gauges. Then he stepped back, wiping his hands on an already blackened rag. "It's yours," he said. "Don't rush it. Feel the steel." He watched me for weeks. He'd sit on an overturned 5-gallon bucket, a silent shadow in the corner of the garage, sipping his black coffee from a chipped ceramic mug. He never interfered, never corrected, just observed as I turned countless rods of expensive, 4,140 steel into useless, scarred metal shavings that littered the concrete floor like metallic tears. I cursed, I threw tools, I nearly gave up a dozen times. My frustration a hot, bitter lump in my throat. But every morning I was back at it, the challenge burning brighter than my rage. I learned to feel the steel as he'd said, to listen to the song of the cutting tool, to know by the subtlest vibration when the cut was true. The night I finally got it right, the threads perfect, the tolerance exact to 1,000th of an inch, I held it up to the bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. It was gleaming, flawless, perfect. He walked over, took it from my trembling, grease-stained fingers, and weighed it in his palm. A slow grin spread across his face, a sight rarer than a desert rainstorm. "Hard work has its own reward, Maya," he'd said, his voice raspy with an emotion he'd never show otherwise. "Even if no one else ever sees it, you know what you did. It's part of you now." The Spirit wasn't just a project, it was my salvation. It was my declaration of independence. It was proof that I was more than the quiet, grieving orphan my aunt and uncle had so dutifully taken in out of pity after my mom died. It was my own creation, built from scrap and sweat and sheer, stubborn will. It was my wings long before I ever pinned the silver ones of the Air Force to my chest. I held that bolt in my hand now, The memory so vivid I could almost smell the garage again, feel the satisfying heft of a well-made tool. I remembered the day we finished, the triumphant, deafening roar of the radial engine coming to life, shaking the very foundation of the house and rattling the neighbors' windows. I remembered the look of pure, unadulterated pride in Dad's eyes as we taxied onto the dusty airstrip for its maiden flight. It was a look of absolute trust, of shared victory. A look I wouldn't see again for over a decade. Not until Captain Evans looked at me the same way, his smile tight with confidence through the comms, right before our final mission. Right before the sky fell in and turned to fire. The Tacoma swerved violently as my knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. The bolt in my other hand suddenly felt heavier. Colder. It wasn't a talisman of my first success anymore. It felt like an exhibit in the trial of my greatest failure. My gaze dropped to it again, my eyes tracing the familiar, hard-won shape. But this time, I saw something I'd never seen before, or maybe had willfully ignored. Under the grime, near the hexagonal head, was a faint, almost invisible hairline crack, a microscopic stress fracture, a flaw. A terrifying, gut-wrenching wave of déjà vu washed over me, cold as cryo-fluid, as I realized it was a flaw I had seen before. On a different piece of metal. In the wreckage, the Mojave sky on that first test flight was a canvas of impossible blue, stretched tight from horizon to horizon. A palpable energy crackled in the air, a hum that resonated deep in my bones. My father was my ballast, his quiet presence in the rear seat a silent vote of confidence. I gripped the controls, my knuckles white, my breath held tight in my chest. And then, it happened. The spirit lifted. She clawed for the sky, and for a handful of heart-stopping seconds, we were more bird than machine. We soared over Antelope Valley, a pure, uncut sensation of freedom so intense, my heart felt like it would tear through my ribs. I had done it. I had actually done it. The landing was smoother than a glass of good whiskey. High on adrenaline and accomplishment, I practically vaulted from the cockpit and ran for the house to grab a celebratory glass of lemonade. I couldn't have been gone for more than 5 minutes. When I returned, I froze at the garage door. The sight that met me stole the air from my lungs. Uncle Robert stood there, a small ball-peen hammer held loosely in his hand. And on the walnut instrument panel, the one I had spent weeks sanding, staining, and sealing to a mirror finish, was a deep, star-shaped crater. An ugly, deliberate wound right next to the altimeter, with cracks spiderwebbing out from the point of impact. He just shrugged, that familiar, self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. "Looked a little loose," he said, his voice a sickening parody of innocence. "Just giving it a little tap to secure it for you, kiddo." But I knew better. It was calculated sabotage, a petty, intentional act to tarnish my victory, to steal my one clean moment. It was his way of reminding me that he would never let me have anything that was truly, completely mine. Blinded by hot tears of rage and betrayal, I ran to find her. My stepmother, the woman he'd married after my mom was gone. I found her on the patio, flipping through a magazine. I choked out the story, my voice cracking, expecting outrage, demanding justice. Instead, she let out a long, weary sigh. "Oh, Maya, don't be so dramatic," she said, not even looking up. "Your uncle was just trying to help. You're always so sensitive." Then she turned a page, dismissing my anguish as if it were a pesky fly. I watched, stunned into silence, as she rose and walked over to him, a tall glass of iced tea sweating in her hand. "Here you go, honey," she cooed, her voice all warmth and affection. "You look tired. Sit down and rest." In that single devastating moment, the cracked walnut panel meant nothing. The real wreckage was right there in my chest. She wasn't just ignoring my pain, she was actively choosing his side, nurturing the very hand that had wounded me. The long drive back to the base was shrouded in a suffocating silence. Dad drove, his eyes fixed on the ribbon of asphalt unwinding in the headlights. Then, without a word, his right arm snaked back between the seats. His big, calloused hand fumbled for a moment before finding mine. He didn't speak. He just squeezed. A firm, steady pressure that said everything words could not. It said, "I see you. I know what you did, and I am so damn proud of you." That silent acknowledgement became the bedrock of my soul. Back in the cab of my pickup, On this lonely stretch of highway, my fingers brushed against the cold, familiar steel of the old bolt. The memory wasn't just a ghost, it was a fresh wound, a painful map explaining why I was here right now. Judged unworthy, once again, by the very people who were supposed to have my six. The pattern held. And I was left wondering if this time there would be anyone at all to reach back and take my hand. My war ended not with a bang, but with the hiss of bus brakes on sun-scorched asphalt. I stepped off in Lancaster, a town on the frayed edge of the Mojave where dust and regret settled in equal measure. Anonymity was a harsh medicine, but a necessary one. Here, I wasn't Robert Vance's broken niece, the ghost in the machine of Singh's legacy. I was just another face, another pair of hands looking for work, my entire life compressed into a single, olive-drab duffel bag. The new life was 4 walls in a roadside motel that smelled permanently of stale cigarette smoke and industrial-strength bleach. No bed, no table. Just my issued sleeping bag on a threadbare carpet that had seen better decades. I paid the weekly rent in cash, earned from a new kind of penance, a mechanic's job at a small civilian airfield. 12-hour shifts wrestling with stubborn bolts and aging propeller engines, my hands perpetually stained with grease and hydraulic fluid. It was grounding work, honest in a way that corporate boardrooms never were, but every night, long past sunset, I'd return to my room with an ache that sank deep into my bones, a phantom pain that echoed old injuries. Dinner was usually a sandwich from the gas station next door, eaten while sitting on the floor, my back against the wall. The silence in that room was the loudest thing I'd ever known. Louder than the scream of a jet engine on takeoff, louder than the chaos of a hot landing zone. It was a crushing, suffocating void filled only by the ghosts of what I'd lost, the feel of a control stick in my hand, the camaraderie of my squadron, the faces of my parents. Then, a few weeks before Thanksgiving, something broke the miserable monotony. Slipped under my door was a glossy, heavyweight envelope that felt alien against the grimy carpet. My heart hammered against my ribs. No one knew I was here. I tore it open. Inside, slick and bright, was the latest issue of Aviation Innovators magazine. And there he was. My Uncle Robert on the cover, smiling a predator's smile. The headline screamed in bold, clean font, the visionary guiding Singh's legacy into the future. I scanned the article, my fingers trembling. It was a hagiography, painting him as the sole savior of my parents' company, the genius who had stepped in to steer the ship. They mentioned my father, Dr. Maya Singh, in passing. My mother, a brilliant engineer in her own right, was a footnote. My name, Maya, was not mentioned once. It was a complete erasure. I was a non-entity, a ghost they had successfully exorcised from the family story. The magazine was a gut punch. But the follow-up, a few days later, was the twist of the knife. My burner phone, silent for weeks, buzzed against the floor. An unknown number. I answered, my voice a dry rasp. Maya, it's Jessica from Mr. Vance's office. Her voice was syrupy sweet. The kind of professional pleasantness that could coat poison. I hope I'm not disturbing you. What do you want, Jessica? Oh, your uncle just wanted me to call and make sure you received the magazine, she chirped. He's so proud of the direction the company is heading. He thought you'd want to see it. I said nothing. The silence stretched thick and heavy. Also, she added, her voice dropping to a confidential, almost sympathetic tone, he wanted me to ask if you'd given any more thought to signing those transfer papers. It would just be so much easier for everyone if we could get it all settled and squared away before the holidays. And there it was. The click of the tumblers falling into place. The magazine wasn't a thoughtless slight. The timing just before the holidays wasn't a coincidence. This was a coordinated attack. A psychological operation, designed with chilling precision. They weren't just trying to buy me out, they were trying to break me. The magazine was the shock and awe campaign, meant to remind me of the world I'd lost, to make me feel insignificant. The phone call was the ground assault, a soft voice twisting the knife of my isolation, using a time of family and togetherness as leverage to make me surrender. I ended the call without another word. The room was silent again, but the quality of it had changed. The oppressive emptiness was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Robert thought I was a broken soldier, licking her wounds in the desert. He was wrong. He had just reminded me what kind of soldier I was. I knelt and unzipped my duffel bag. I pushed aside my last clean set of fatigues and a worn flight jacket. My fingers closed around a hard, dust-proof case. I flipped the latches, the clicks echoing in the quiet room. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was a compact satellite phone. I powered it on. The screen flickered to life, a familiar green glow in the dim light. I scrolled through the contact list. It had only one entry, a name I hadn't needed in a very long time. Ghost. My thumb hovered over the call button. My uncle wanted a war. He just didn't realize I still had my own arsenal. Sleep was a foreign country that night, its borders closed to me. I sat on the cold floor of my temporary apartment, the single, rusted bolt from my father's workshop heavy in my palm. The metal was cool against my skin, a stark contrast to the fire licking at my insides. My father's voice, a ghost from years ago, echoed in the silence. Bullies, Maya, they only win when you let their words become your truth. The article wasn't just words, it was an attack, an attempt to define me by my moment of failure, to ground my entire career in a single, catastrophic headline. The initial sting of shame was burning away, leaving behind a hard, cold fury. I wasn't a victim. I was a pilot, and I needed to be around people who understood the language of service, the silent grammar of sacrifice. I needed to be around soldiers. That evening, a little after sundown, I left the base. The thought of returning to those four empty walls, to the deafening quiet where the accusations screamed loudest, was a physical weight. Instead of turning left towards my apartment, I turned right, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, and drove towards a pinprick of light off the highway. The hangar, a dive bar for lifers and retirees near Edwards Air Force Base. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pulled into the gravel lot. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to hide. But the thought of another night alone with my ghosts was worse. I pushed the heavy wooden door open and stepped inside. The air hung thick with the scent of stale coffee, spilled beer, and something else, something familiar and comforting, the faint, metallic tang of hydraulic fluid and jet fuel. The walls were a museum of service. Black and white photos of young men with old eyes, standing in front of planes that were now legends. A handful of older veterans were hunched over a pool table, under a low-hanging light, the sharp crack of the balls the only punctuation in the low murmur of conversation. They looked up as I entered, their gazes sweeping over me, but there was no judgment, no prying curiosity. Just a slow, collective nod of acknowledgement. Here, the rigid set of my shoulders wasn't a sign of tension, it was a uniform. Here, my clipped, purposeful stride wasn't something to be analyzed, it was a shared language. A man detached himself from the bar and walked towards me. He had a shock of silver hair and shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of a dozen young airmen. A lifetime of command was etched into the lines around his eyes. "You look a little lost, Captain," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He extended a calloused hand. "They call me Pops," he said. "Chief Master Sergeant, Air Force, retired." I took his hand. The grip was firm, steady. "Captain Maya Singh," I managed, my voice hoarse. "Air Force." His eyes, a clear, pale blue, held mine. In them, I saw an understanding that needed no words. He didn't ask what I was doing there, why I wasn't with a squadron, or what had put that haunted look on my face. He just glanced at my worn flight suit, the exhaustion I couldn't hide, and asked the simplest, kindest question I'd heard in months. "Have you had dinner?" I could only shake my head, a lump forming in my throat. "That won't do," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "My wife, Rosa, she always makes too much. Come on." Before I could protest, he was steering me back out the door and towards an old but immaculate Ford pickup. The short drive was a blur. We pulled up to a small, tidy house with a porch swing and a perfectly manicured lawn. The moment we stepped inside, I was enveloped by the rich aroma of beef stew and warm bread. A woman with a kind face and a smile that reached all the way to her eyes came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. This was Rosa. She didn't ask my name. She didn't ask who I was or why her husband had brought a stranger home. She just opened her arms and hugged me, a firm, motherly embrace that nearly broke me. A few minutes later, I was sitting at their kitchen table with a steaming bowl of stew in front of me. It was thick with vegetables and tender meat, seasoned with something that tasted like home. It was the first real meal, the first moment of peace I'd had in what felt like a lifetime. After dinner, while Rosa hummed a tune and cleared the plates, Pops led me out to the back porch. He handed me a mug of black coffee. The night air was cool. "I don't know what battle you're fighting, Captain," he said softly, looking out at the dark expanse of the desert. "But I know this. No soldier fights alone. That bird you fly is just a machine. The squadron, the people on your wing, they're your real family." His words weren't a revelation, they were a key, unlocking a door in my mind I'd sealed shut. The isolation I felt wasn't a life sentence. It was a tactical error. I wasn't a lone wolf licking her wounds. I was a soldier, cut off from her unit. My mission was clear: find my squadron. And as he said it, my eyes drifted past him, into the small workshop attached to his garage. Through the window, lit by a single bare bulb, I saw it. Hanging on the wall among the neatly arranged tools was a faded flight jacket, and on the leather patch stitched over the breast, I could just make out the insignia, a snarling black panther, poised to strike. The insignia of the 13th Fighter Squadron. My father's squadron. A few days crawled by in a haze of grease, paperwork, and the low, constant ache in my leg that served as my body's barometer for stress. The quiet of the late afternoon, thick with the scent of aviation fuel and warm metal, was shattered by the crunch of gravel. A black sedan, the kind that whispers of old money and backroom deals, pulled up to my hangar. My Uncle Robert and Marcus emerged, their tailored suits a stark, offensive contrast to my oil-stained coveralls. "Maya!" Uncle Robert's voice boomed with a cheerfulness so fake it was almost physically painful. We were so worried. They strode into my sanctuary, my workspace, bringing with them the cloying scent of expensive cologne that couldn't quite mask the stench of their intentions. Marcus's eyes, cold and calculating, swept across the organized chaos of my workbench, the scattered tools, the half-disassembled engine block, a look of perfectly crafted. Pity settled on his face. "Oh, me," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're living here. It's so rustic." They launched into their performance, a well-rehearsed play about misunderstandings and the pressures of grief. Marcus took my hand, his own was soft and clammy. "We're family, Maya," he said, his eyes welling up with tears that were as real as a $3 bill. "Your parents wouldn't want to see us like this." Then came the final act, the knockout blow from Uncle Robert. "Listen," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I've spoken with the lawyers. We can make this all go away. Just sign a small agreement. I'll provide for you, a generous monthly stipend. You won't have to work in this place anymore. You can have a quiet life." The offer hung in the stale air, shimmering like a desert mirage. An easy out. A release from the fight I was so tired of waging. For a heartbeat, my resolve faltered. A part of me, the part that ached with every step, and relived the sand and the fire in my nightmares, screamed to take it, to just let it all go. And then I saw it. As my uncle finished his little speech, his eyes flickered to Marcus for a fraction of a second. It wasn't a look of concern or hope. It was a look of smug, reptilian triumph. The look a hunter gives his partner just before the trap is sprung. In that instant, the fog of their deception vanished. This wasn't an act of kindness. It was a closing tactic. They weren't trying to welcome their niece back into the fold. They were trying to buy my signature and silence me for good. I pulled my hand from Marcus's grasp. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the hangar with the force of a controlled detonation. Their smiles froze. The false warmth in their eyes evaporated, replaced by a flash of pure, unadulterated anger before the masks were hastily put back in place. The real confrontation came 2 days later. They cornered me in the parking lot of a grocery store, the setting sun glinting off the windshields of minivans. There were no more pretenses. The masks were gone. Uncle Robert's face was a twisted mask of rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Maya?" he snarled, jabbing a finger in my direction. "I'm giving you one last chance," he growled, his voice low and venomous. "You will sign those papers, or my first call will be to your commanding officer. I'll send him that after-action report, the one from your last mission. I'll tell him you're a liability, unstable. You won't just lose the company, Maya. You'll lose everything." And there it was. The line. He wasn't just threatening my inheritance, my father's legacy. He was threatening my honor, my uniform, my service. He was threatening the very core of who I am. Something inside me, a core of compressed rage and grief that had been under pressure since Kandahar, finally detonated. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I acted. I took one sharp, deliberate step forward, closing the distance between us like I'd been trained to do, my presence suddenly filling the space he thought he commanded. "You listen to me," I said, my voice dangerously calm, controlled, and stripped of all emotion except for a chilling certainty. "You can try to take the money. You can try to steal the company. But you will never, ever touch my uniform. This game is over. I'll see you at the hearing. And I swear to you, I won't just win. I will dismantle every single one of your lies." Without another word, I turned my back on their stunned faces, climbed into my truck, and drove away, the image of their shock a small, cold satisfaction in my chest. I didn't look back. I pulled out my phone, found the number I needed and hit dial. A crisp, professional voice answered on the second ring. "Alex Rivera." "Alex," I said, my voice as steady as a rock. "It's Maya Singh. We have a problem. And now, we're going on the offensive." The day of the final board hearing arrived just after dawn, the sky a flat, sterile gray that matched the concrete towers of downtown. I walked into that boardroom with a strange calm, the kind you only find in the eye of a hurricane or the cockpit of a jet breaking the sound barrier. It was a silence born not of peace, but of absolute focus. My uncle sat across the long, polished mahogany table, a ghost in a tailored suit. I didn't look at him. My eyes found the American flag standing in the corner behind the chairman, its colors a stark contrast to the room's muted tones. I recited my oath in my head, the words a silent mantra. It was the only armor I needed. Robert's lawyer, a shark in a $1,000 suit, went first, his voice a low, condescending drone. Then my uncle spoke, launching into a performance worthy of a Broadway stage. It was a soliloquy of grief and concern for his troubled niece, the decorated soldier broken by war, unfit to carry the weight of her father's legacy. He spun a tale of my recklessness, my instability, his words painting a picture of me that I barely recognized. I sat there, back straight, hands resting on the table, feeling the phantom weight of my flight suit. In the military, they teach you to control your breathing, to master your own biology in the face of G-forces and enemy fire. I did that now, each breath a measured act of defiance. Then it was our turn. My lawyer, Alex Rivera, a former JOG officer with a mind like a steel trap, stood up. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," he began, his voice cutting through the tension. "The opposition has attempted to paint a portrait of my client, Captain Singh, as a soldier shattered by her service. We're here to present a different picture." Alex didn't start with emotion. He started with facts. Cold, hard, undeniable proof that Uncle Robert had willfully concealed a critical addendum to my father's will. An addendum that detailed his specific wishes for the company's transition. A murmur went through the room. Robert's face tightened. Then, Alex gestured to the projector screen. And now, a word from the founder himself. It wasn't a photograph. It was a video from Dad's workshop logs. The grainy footage flickered to life, and there he was, sitting on a stool in the garage, the spirit gleaming like a silver promise behind him. His face, so familiar it was a physical ache in my chest, filled the screen. He spoke about his vision, about the breakthroughs in avionics he was chasing, about a future he wanted to build. "And if anything should happen to me," he said, his eyes finding the camera lens, finding me across time, "I trust one person, and one person only, to carry this legacy forward. That's my daughter. Her intuition, her precision, that's what's needed. She's the best damn pilot I've ever known." The video ended. The silence in the room was absolute, thick and heavy. I could feel every set of eyes on me, but my own were burning, fixed on the empty screen where my father's face had just been. Then Alex delivered the final payload. "There is one more fact Mr. Vance neglected to mention. The partner he is so eager to sell this company to, Omni Defense, has its chairman present in this very room." Alex paused, letting the statement land. Sir, would you care to stand? General Miller retired. Every head whipped around. At the far end of the table, an older man with a ramrod spine and a chest full of invisible metals rose to his feet. Uncle Robert went white as a sheet. The general didn't look at Robert. His gaze, sharp and assessing, met mine. I knew your father, Captain, he said, his voice a low rumble that commanded attention. He was a man of integrity. And what Mr. Vance has done here is a disgrace to his memory. Omni Defense will have no part in this. It was the kill shot. The game was over. Later, in a sterile waiting room, my uncle finally faced me. Are you happy now? He hissed, his voice trembling with a rage that had finally burned through his polished facade. You've taken everything. I looked into his eyes, and for the first time, all I felt was a profound, aching pity. You did this to yourself, Uncle Robert, I said, my voice quiet but steady. I never wanted the company. I just wanted my uncle back. I turned and walked away, leaving him alone with the ruins he had built. A year later, I stood in the old garage. But it was profoundly different. The silence of memory had been replaced by the vibrant sounds of laughter and discovery. A new, hand-carved wooden sign hung over the wide-open door, the Singh Foundation Wings for the Future. In partnership with local schools, we had transformed my father's workshop into a STEM and flight training center for underprivileged youth and the children of military families. Colonel Miller, shepherd to the kids now happily retired, stood beside me, watching a group of teenagers work on a flight simulator. Inside the house, Pops and Rosa were making a massive lunch, the smell of garlic and spices drifting out into the afternoon air. My eyes fell on a portrait of my parents, hung proudly on the wall. The company wasn't just building technology anymore. It was building hope. My war was over. But my mission, the mission to hold the line for those coming up behind me, to give them a place to take flight that had just begun. My family had tried to erase me from the story. They failed. Instead, I picked up the pen and wrote a new legacy, not just for me, but for all of us. And it would be a legacy of courage, of resilience, and of finally, truly, coming home.